Hello everybody and welcome back to my sewing room. If you're new, my name's Diane and I like to share with you the story of the quilts that I've been making. This week's video is a little bit different because I haven't got a quilt to share. I have got a swag bag or a tote bag. It's this one. So I decided just before we went away for a few days to the Isle of Wight at the beginning of June that I needed to have another tote bag, a swag bag, and I wanted one that's light in colour and it has to be robust, really robust, because if you're out and about in the British summer, which we like to be, so we like to visit historical homes and historical gardens, and if you're walking all day in those places you need to be prepared. So in this little bag, quite a big bag, I have a raincoat and sunscreen and a sun hat and water and insect repellent and a phone and a purse, camera, usually on the phone. I don't usually have a separate camera anymore, I usually just take the phone. And so it begins to be quite a heavy bag. And also in these historical homes and gardens that we visit, they sometimes have second-hand book shops, and one of my most favourite thing to do is to wander around a second-hand bookshop. I love books and look for quilt books or quilt related books or sometimes art books, but I have a lot of those. It's usually quilt books now that I look at, and I did buy two, so the bag has to be big enough to hold those things. Usually visit those places after I've been round the house, but I did buy two lovely books. I bought this one, The Quilter's Guide to Amish Quilts. It's a Jan Jefferson, Maggie McCormick Gordon publication, and it was in 1998. Fascinating. I paid £1 for it. Fascinating book about the history of Amish quilts and some of the lifestyles of the Amish people and their beliefs. So really interesting, that one. And then I bought this one, also £1, which is Fresh Air in the Attic. Welcome makeovers for 7 classic quilts. And this was edited by Trisha Brown and photography by Trish Reynolds. And the lovely thing about this quilt, this was a 2004 publication, and the lovely thing about buying second-hand books is that they have sometimes messages inside, and this one says "Happy quilting!" exclamation mark, Trisha Brown. So it was the editor that signed it inside first of all, and then it says "Quilts to you," and there are two names here, which is Katie Harris and Sue Weidman, and they are both quilters, so that is lovely as well. Lovely books. So I need a bag that can contain swag like that. They also sometimes have plant sales in these historical houses that we visit and gardens, and so sometimes I want to put a little plant in here. So this bag has to be really robust and washable, because sometimes there's marks on it. But also, if you're visiting these historical houses, often they don't want you to carry a bag around in case you damage any of the priceless things that they house there. I'll show you some images of some of the priceless treasures that we saw. We visited Osborne House on the Isle of Wight, and that is the summer home of Queen Victoria, Prince Albert and their 9 children. If you're ever in that part of the world, I recommend that you go. It's an absolutely stunning place full of beautiful treasures. And so if you're wandering around in that particular house, if you've got a backpack, they said you can still keep it with you, but to wear it on the front. But in some of the historical houses you visit, they like you to store them, or if you can roll it down into a small package, then you can keep it with you. So, like I say, very versatile. So I'll show you some of the beautiful images of Osborne House. And when you visit these historical houses in the UK, sometimes they allow you to take photographs, sometimes they don't. Often on your phone they do, but you can't use a flash. And so in Osborne House they did allow us to take photographs without a flash. And I particularly like looking at the textiles. I like looking for patterns. I like looking at the ceiling decorations and also the tiles, because sometimes you get ideas for quilts. And so these are some of the images that I took for future quilts, perhaps. And now I'd like to share with you how I made this bag. So it was a spur of the moment decision. I didn't use anything from outside of my quilting room, my sewing room. Everything I had here. So as I've been tidying up lately, I came across a swatch of fabric. Now this fabric was gifted to me a long time ago, and it was a curtain sample that you can get from shops. And so I thought it's nice colours for the summer, and I thought I had a couple of matching or coordinating fat quarters that I could use on the inside. And so this is the piece of fabric that I started with. So the first thing I did was to cut that into two rectangles, 19 inches by 17 inches. And if you look closely, you can see it's a sort of tree design, and so I wanted to make sure that it was directional, that all the trees had their leaves towards the top of the bag. And as you can see from this little image, it's quite an open weave fabric, and so what I did was to sew around three sides of the bag, and then I zigzag stitched around that, and then I turned it right side out and I put a little seam just around the edge. So it's a sort of French seam, so that makes it double strength on the outside of that bag. So the three sides had zigzag, a line of stitching, and then I top stitched all the way around. And then I turned the bag inside out and I pushed open the corner, flattening so the side seam and the bottom seam lay on top of each other. And then I marked with a pencil 1.5 inches away from the point, and I put a couple of stitches across there, and then I zigzagged that again, and then I snipped off the corner because I wanted a box shaped bag. And because the fabric is an open weave, I just ran a little bit of zigzag stitching around the top just to make sure that later on it doesn't start to fray. So I did have two fat quarters of the same fabric that I thought coordinated nicely with the front of the bag, and so I cut those down into two rectangles, 17 by 19, the same size as the outside of the bag, and I put two pockets, one on each side. So the first pocket was to go the full width of the inside of the lining, and so I just turned over the seams, pressed those, stitched those down, and then added that pocket to the inside. And I wanted my phone to fit in that pocket, but I didn't want it to rock about, and so it was the right depth, and so I just put little stitch down the side just to make sure that there was enough room for the phone to fit in, and so that was the one pocket complete. And I wanted the pocket on the other side of the bag to be a little bit smaller. That just needed to fit my purse in. And so that one, I took a same piece of the outside fabric, turned under all of the edges, positioned that way I wanted it to go, and then I stitched around 3 sides, leaving the top open. And I sewed around the outside of that on the 3 sides. And I did remember to leave an opening in the bottom of the bag so that I could turn it afterwards, and I zigzagged around the edges, leaving the bottom open, and then I boxed the corners the same way as I boxed the external part of the bag. And I had enough fabric left over to make the handles in the same material as the main body of the bag. And so the handles were 32 inches by 3.5 inches, so 2 of those, and then I pressed those in half. Then I turned the sides in to meet the seam in the middle, and then I pressed those over again, and I just put a row of stitching down each side of the bag handles. So once I'd made those handles, I took the main body of the bag, the outside, and I lay the handles down, making sure they weren't twisted, at the same distance apart, so on the flat body, seams at the side, and then I sewed over the top of those handles a couple of times. Like I said, it could be quite a heavy load for those poor handles to carry, so I put a couple of strength stitches there. And then I just took a couple of safety pins to take those handles and make sure that they were out of the way, because the next thing I wanted to do was to add the lining, and I didn't want to get those caught up. But before I sewed the lining on, I just wanted to add a little snap presser shut. And so I use these little things. So it's a little brass popper, and as you can see, one has an indentation and one protrudes, so they fit together, and they are a magnet, so they snap together and they close quite tightly. And you should have 2 of those little silver plates that they fit on the back. So you can see there are 2 arms on the back of those brass fronts. And if you look closely at the lining, you can see that I have pressed the middle part, so the seams are on the left and the right, and I've made a little press in the centre of the lining, and that's where I want that silver little plate to fit. And so what I did was just to mark it where I wanted it to be, and then I used my little seam ripper just to force a hole in the fabric on the top. You can just see there's 2 little holes, and that's where the arms will fit. So you can see the brass bit of the snapper is on the right side of the fabric, and I've just forced those 2 little arms through the holes that I'd made earlier. To make sure that that little brass popper doesn't make a hole and pull through, I've added a little piece of wadding, so I've just placed that over those arms, forced a hole through the wadding, and then I put the silver plate over the top of that, opened up the arms, and that's the presses finished. And then I turned the lining so that it's right side on the outside, and I slipped that inside the bag so it's right sides together, so the outer body and the inner body are right sides together. And then I just pinned all the way around the top, making sure that my seams on the sides were level, and I just ran a row of stitching all the way around the top. And I added a couple of stitches around the top of that bag and a zigzag stitch again. Like I say, strength was everything for this bag for me. And so once I'd done that, I could then turn it inside out through the hole in the bottom of the lining. I pressed it all flat, and then I pinned it, and I just ran a couple of stitches across the hole in the bottom. And then I ran a couple of strengthening and decorative stitches around the top of the bag, and I added a couple of buttons. So I didn't have 4 matching buttons, but I had 2 orange ones to fit on this side and 2 wooden ones to fit on the other. So you can just see those wooden buttons and those rows of decorative stitching. And then for my one final thing, I added a little bit of elastic. So I had this little bit of elastic in my sewing box, and I just threaded it through the 2 eyes on the big buttons, put a knot in, and what that enables me to do is, if I'm out and about putting my bag around, usually not paying very much attention to it, then there's a little bit of added security just to hold it shut, because I do have a tendency, if I'm wandering around a bookshop and I've put my bag down, that I might forget it. And so yeah, so a little bit of extra security there. And that is the simple swag bag, tote bag, and I have used it many times already this summer, and I know that I shall be using it many more. So if you've got some scrap bits of fabric in your sewing room and you feel like having a go at making something that is very useful, not particularly pretty, but very, very useful, why don't you have a go? So that's it for this week. If you're still with me, thank you very much for your company and enjoy your sewing. I am working on, well, just finished the flimsy of Project Liners. I started the red, white and blue quilt. That's been on my to-do list for quite a while, so I'll share those with you when they're finished. So enjoy your sewing, and I'll see you again soon. Bye.